So once again, thank you all so much for joining us. We will begin with our prayers. Om Jnanatirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurtamena Tasmai Shri Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishtam Saptam Bhutale Swami Bhagavan Tattva Nama Om Shtaya Shtaya Bhaktivedanta Namaste Saraswati Gauravani Chai So thank you all so much for this opportunity to serve as we try to present an overview of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, the wonderful book by Srila Prabhupada that is based on the biography of Lord Chaitanya called Chaitanya Charitamrita. So I pray for all your blessings to trust this class so that we can all have a better understanding of pastimes of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Today we're going to discuss the 6th chapter of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, which is called His Forms are One and the Same. This is a continuation of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami that we began a few weeks ago. So each week we're going to start with the invocation, which is the 18th, the first chapter of the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jai Jai Shri Chaitanya Jai Nityananda Jai Advaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Translation. Glory to Shri Chaitanya and Nityananda, glory to Advaita Chandra, and glory to all the devotees of Sri Gaura, Lord Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had begun his teachings to Sanatana Goswami with the most basic and important fundamental concepts of spiritual life. That we are the spirit souls because we have fallen into this material world with suffering, and that the only way for us to get out of the suffering is by understanding our real identity as the spirit souls and then acting on that identity, which means taking the process of devotional service. Then in the last chapter, Lord Chaitanya had described the supremacy of devotional service above all the other processes of self-realization that are described in Vedas. So these various processes, of course, the Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, and so on. And now, Lord Chaitanya is describing more about the form of the object of devotional service, which is Lord Krishna himself. So this chapter contains a lot of terminologies, and I'm going to try and go through them by the mercy of Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga as carefully as possible. But if there's still some doubts, you can please stop me for questions, and we will put the summary of the class on our WhatsApp group so that these terms will be able to be read and maybe more clearer in understanding. So we will begin. Sri Prabhupada writes, by devotional service, one can understand that Krishna, first of all, manifests himself as Swayam Rupa, his personal form, then as Tadakatma Rupa, and then as Avesha Rupa. It is in these three features that he manifests himself in his transcendental form. The feature of Swayam Rupa is the form by which Krishna can be understood by one who may not understand his other features. In other words, the form by which Krishna is directly understood is called Swayam Rupa, or his personal form. So this Swayam Rupa that Srila Prabhupada is referring to is Krishna's original two-armed form that is eternally present in his divine abode of Goloka Vrindavan. So we had discussed a little briefly about Krishna's, the supremacy of the Swayam Rupa form when we were discussing the supremacy of Krishna above all forms. And we had quoted the Paribhas Sutra of Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Chapter 3, Text 20. Ete chamsha kalaha pumsaha Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam Indrari Vyakulam Lokam Diyanti Yuge Yuge. So this verse is explaining that all the incarnations of Krishna, whether they are coming directly from Krishna, in which case they are called amshas or direct expansions, or whether they are coming from other expansions. So we can explain this as Lord Balaram is a direct expansion, an amsha of Krishna, but then Lord Narayan is an expansion from Lord Balaram. So he's an expansion of an expansion. And as an expansion of an expansion, or an indirect expansion, he's called a phala. So whether a direct expansion, the amsha, or an indirect expansion, phala, all are portions of portions of Krishna, meaning that Krishna is the original Supreme Personality of Godhead, from which all incarnations and all expansions come from. That is stated very clearly in this verse. So Srila Prabhupada is explaining to us that even if we can't understand all these other forms, because as we'll discuss in this chapter, they are so numerous and their functions are so extraordinary, and the way they appear is sometimes beyond our understanding. The most important thing is that we understand Swayam Rupa Krishna, the original Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, and we are so fortunate that we have so much literature, the association of so many elevated souls who know so much about Krishna, and we get so much understanding from hearing them that we can actually understand the Lord's original form in quite good detail, enough for us to make progress in spiritual lives. It's very important. Srila continues. The Tadakatma Rupa is that form which most resembles the Swayam Rupa, but there are some differences in the bodily features. The Tadakatma Rupa is divided into two manifestations, the personal expansion, Swamsha, and the pastime expansion, Vilas. So now we're coming to the next category. We've understood Swayam Rupa to be Krishna's original Swan form. But when there are some bodily differences in the expansions that come from Krishna, so that means that the features of the expansion are not identical to Krishna's bodily features, then they go into a different category. And this category is called Tadakatma Rupa. So this distinction between these two categories, Swayam Rupa and Tadakatma Rupa, is based on the bodily features that are different. So when these bodily features are somewhat similar, even though they're different, then they have this category called Vilas, and we can understand it in the way that when Krishna manifests himself in the Narayan form, for example, he has similar features to his original form, Swayam Rupa. That is, there's the same bluish complexion between him and Lord Narayan. They have the same lotus-like eyes, the same raised nose, the same beautiful mouth, the same lovely curly hair, and so on. But the difference is, of course, is that Lord Narayan is four-armed. He doesn't bear the flute, and so on. So where there are slight differences, this Tadikatma feature is further categorized as Vilas. So differences, but slight differences. Then when the differences in the bodily features in the Tadikatma Rupa are much greater, then this falls into the Shwamsa category. So in this category, we have the incarnations, for example, of Mathura and Lord Varahadev. So they're also Krishna, they're all his expansions, but their bodily features are much more different than Krishna's bodily features. At the end of the day, they're all Krishna, of course, and they're all possessing unlimited potency, but the difference is that their bodily features are different. So this is how we have these two categories, Swayam Rupa Krishna and Tadikatma Rupa Krishna. Then we go on to understanding the Avesha category. As far as the Avesha Rupa is concerned, when Krishna empowers some suitable living entity to represent him, that living entity is called Avesha Rupa or Shakti Avesha Avatar. So we may have heard this term Shakti Avesha Avatar before, and it generally applies to a jiva soul like us, who is especially given a certain power of Krishna so that they can execute a task or fulfill pastimes for some purpose. So sometimes in the Shakti Avesh category, they can even be direct expansions of the Lord, like Lord Anantashesh. He is actually Vishnu Tattva, not Jiva Tattva like us. But because he's particularly empowered with certain ability, then he can be classified as Shakti Avesh Avatar. So in terms of Lord Anantashesh, he's particular extraordinary abilities that on his heads, he can bear the entire universe. But generally, the Shakti-Avesh categories describe a jiva, a soul like us, who is particularly empowered with some ability from the Lord, some potency from the Lord. So, because they are descending into this world with this potency, they're also called avatar. Avatar means one sense, but of course, again, the difference is that they are usually jivas. And we have many examples in this category, like the Kokumaras. They are jivas, but they are especially empowered with the Lord's Jnana Shakti, or the knowledge power. Narada Muni is also a jiva, but he is empowered with the Bhakti Shakti, or the power of devotional service, a power that is so profound that he can travel all over the universe and convert anyone by devotional service into a pure devotee. And of course, we also have Srila Prabhupada, who is also considered the Shakti Avesh avatar. We just celebrated his appearance day, his divine appearance on Saturday. Srila Prabhupada was certainly especially empowered by the Lord in order to transplant Krishna consciousness to different parts of the world. So we go on to understand a little more about Swayam Prakash and how it's further categorized. The personal form of Krishna can be divided into two, Swayam Rupa and Swayam Prakash. As far as his Swayam Rupa, or pastime form, is concerned, it is in that form that he remains always in Vrindavan, with the inhabitants of Vrindavan. This personal form, Swayam Rupa, can be further divided into the Prabhava forms and Vaibhava forms. For example, Krishna expanded himself in multiple forms during the Rasa dance in order to dance with each and every gopi who took part in that dance. Similarly, he expanded himself into 16,108 forms in Dwaraka when he married 16,108 wives. There are some instances of great mystics expanding their bodily forms by the yoga process, but Krishna did not expand himself that way. In Vedic history, Sobhari Rishi expanded himself to 8 forms by the yoga process, but these expansions were simply reflections, for Sobhari remained one. But when Krishna manifested himself in different forms, each and every one of them was a separate individual. When Narada Muni visited Krishna at his different palaces in Dwaraka, he was astonished at this, and yet Narada is never astonished to see the expansions of a yogi's body, since he knows the trick himself. So yogis, of course, by mystic process, can only get material benedictions. The mystic process, unless they're able to realize Krishna within the heart and take to devotional service, will not grant spiritual powers or spiritual potencies. So Savari Muni was only able to attain a mystic power that was material in origin. So he was able to divide himself into 8 material forms. So because these forms were material, they weren't capable of consciousness. So they weren't capable of acting on their own. These material forms were basically just reflections of the original form of Savari Muni, meaning that they couldn't act independently of each other. They had to basically follow the lead of the original form. So if the original form raised its hand, then all the reflections would raise the same hand. They weren't capable of doing performing separate actions. But when it comes to Krishna's transcendental body, Krishna's body is completely spiritual and thus fully conscious. And when Krishna expands, all his expansions are fully conscious and fully capable of acting in an individual way. So this is quite amazing because nobody else possesses such a power. And this is why Narada Muni himself was surprised. Because we can imagine that Narada Muni travels all over the universe. He sees some pretty amazing things. But when he visited Krishna in Dwarka and he saw that Krishna was functioning independently in all 16,108 palaces, he was amazed. So Krishna's spiritual expansions are very different from any material expansions that anybody would be able to do by mystic yoga. Srimad Bhagavatam describes Narada Muni's astonishment at seeing Krishna's expansion in Dwaraka. Narada wondered how the Lord was present with his queens in each and every one of the 16,108 palaces. With each queen, Krishna himself was in a different form, acting in different ways. In one form, he was talking with his wife. In another form, he was petting his children. And in another form, he was performing some household duty. These different activities are conducted by the Lord when he is in emotional forms, which are called by Bhava Prakash expansions. Similarly, there are other unlimited expansions of Krishna's forms, but even when they are divided or expanded without limit, they are still one and the same. There is no difference between one form and another. That is the absolute nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So now we have another division in Swayamrupa. So Swayamrupa can be divided into Vaibhava Prakash and Prabhava Prakash. So we'll discuss Vaibhava Prakash first, which is subject of this paragraph. So what this means is that um, Krishna's form now was identical in each one of these 16,108 palaces, which is different to what we discussed earlier about the Tadikatma forms. Tadikatma forms are different physically in some way from Krishna. But here, because they're all under Swayamrupa, they're all identical forms, but the emotions are different. This is what Sri Prabhupada is explaining to us. The Vaibhava, the difference now is that the emotions of Krishna are what makes these expansions different. So these 16,108 forms may look identical, but because Krishna is experiencing different emotions, different relationships in each of these palaces, then that's what makes these forms different. So in one palace, he's joking with a wife, in another palace, he's perhaps speaking in a more serious tone to his friends, like Devi. Perhaps in another palace, he is playing with his children. So this is what separates all these expansions from each other. So they're one, but they're also different at the same time. These this explanation of Vaibhava Prakash is also going to be explained in the following paragraphs to describe the other expansions of Krishna that are identical with him, like Lord Balarama. In Srimad Bhagavatam, it is stated that when Akura was accompanying Krishna and Balaram from Gokul to Mathura, he entered the waters of the Yamuna River and could see all the planets in the spiritual sky. He also saw the Lord in his Vishnu form, as well as Narada and the four Kumaras who were worshipping. As stated in the Bhagavad Puran, the Supreme Lord's many worshippers, the Vaishnavas or Aryans, are purified by the various processes of worship they perform according to their conviction and spiritual understanding. Each process of worship involves understanding different forms of the Lord as mentioned in the scriptures, but the ultimate idea is to worship the Supreme Lord himself. So we'll get back to the explanation of the Vaibhava Prakashas, but we'll pause here for this important point that Srila Prabhupada is making. Whichever form that one's heart may be moved by of the Lord's, the important thing is that one is always worshipping Supreme Lord. In the material world, because our intelligence is contaminated by the material energy, we often think of other forms which the Vedas present to us, whether they're the forms of the demigods or, as it may be in other cultures, natural spirits, the universe, nature, the ancestors. All these different forms may distract the mind from the forms of Krishna. Certainly because one thinks that they can get material benefits from these forms. But acknowledging that we're all different, and that's the reason why we get attracted by different forms, we realize that this is simply a reflection of the spiritual variegatedness. Because the spiritual world is so full of variety, where Krishna is appearing in innumerable forms, and thus we're able to associate with him in innumerable ways. In the material world, we have so many different forms that sometimes distract us from this. So when our intelligence becomes purified by devotional service, we're able to recognize Krishna's forms as supreme above all else, whichever the forms they may be. And when we, by devotional service, dedicate ourselves to the worship of one of these forms, we're able to get liberation from this material world and attain those planets in the spiritual world where he is eternally residing in these beautiful forms with these wonderful associates. It's very important for us to bear in mind. In his Vaibhava Prakash feature, the Lord manifests himself as Balaram. The Balaram feature is as good as Krishna himself, the only difference being that Krishna's bodily hue is blackish and Balaram's is whitish. The Vaibhava Prakash form was also displayed when Krishna appeared before his mother, Devaki, in the four-handed form of Narayan, just when he entered the world. Then, at the request of his parents, he transformed himself into a two-handed form. Thus, he sometimes manifests four hands and sometimes two. The two-handed form is Vaibhava Prakash, and the four-handed form is Prabhava Prakash. In his personal form, Krishna is just like a cowherd boy, and he thinks of himself in that way. But when he is in the Vasudev form, he thinks of himself as the son of a Kshatriya and feels like a Kshatriya, a princely administrator. So now we're going to go a bit more further into this Vaibhava Prakash. So we explained that it is a subdivision of the Swayam Rupa, original form of Krishna. So the form is identical, but the emotions that the expansion displays are different. So we have been told many times by Srila Prabhupada that Lord Balaram is identical to Krishna. So his Swayam Rupa, he has an expansion that is identical to Krishna's form, but the difference is his emotions. Lord Balaram's emotions are that of the elder brother. So he sees himself as Krishna's protector, almost as in a parental way, looking after him. And Lord Balaram, of course, also sees himself as Krishna's servitor. So he's always trying to assist Krishna in so many different ways. So this is how his emotions make him Vaibhava Prakash. So similarly, when Krishna appeared in Mathura, we understand that he had appeared as an expansion of himself, another Swayam Rupa form that was identical in its appearance, but the mood, the mentality of Krishna when he appeared in Mathura was different. Krishna was, of course, then a member of the Yaduvansh. He was, or he is when he is in that appearance, in that expansion, thinking himself a Kshatriya, a prince. And he did acknowledge himself as the Supreme Personality of Godhead to Vasudeva and Devaki, his parents in that expansion. So they had offered prayers to him when he appeared in this way. But simultaneously, he had appeared in Vrindavan as his original Swayamrupa, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. And here he doesn't see himself, of course, as God. He sees himself as a cowherd boy, the son of Nanda Maharaj and Mati Yashoda. And of course, this being the original form, the form that he appeared in Mathura is his expansion. It's just by common knowledge that people think that Krishna originally appeared in Mathura and then went to Vrindavan. But Srila Rupa Goswami corrects us, that Krishna originally appeared in Vrindavan. It was the form of himself that was simultaneously appearing in Mathura that was the actual expansion. So after Krishna's parents had offered their prayers to him in Mathura, his father Vasudev took his form from Mathura, which is also called Vasudev, but the spelling is of course different. So it's Vasudev, not Vasudev. This Vasudev Krishna was taken by Vasudev, his father, to Vrindavan. And then by Yoga Maya's potency, the original Krishna who was born to Yashoda, he was hidden so that Vasudev only saw the daughter that was born to Yashoda. He put down Vasudev Krishna, and he took the baby girl back to Mathura. So at this point, the original Krishna, who had appeared to Yashoda, and the Vasudev Krishna from Mathura, then became one. And of course, this meant that the original Krishna, he grew up in Vrindavan as the son of Mother Yashoda and Nanda Maharaj. So I hope that's clear. Are there any questions up to this point about what we've been discussing? Anything else that needs to be clarified before we move on? Okay, so we will continue. Sorry?
Hare Krishna. Please, I
Hare
don't
Krishna, Matri.
understand. What's the meaning of
Sure.
Mahajanas? They are kind of incarnations.
Um,
And what kinds they are?
which
Mahajanas. There are 12 Mahajanas. Narada Muni,
no,
Kapila, 12 Kumaras. Even
no.
Yamaraj.
Yeah. So there are some. So the Mahajans are, we could say, a group of authorities on devotional service. So actually, among them, there are empowered incarnations like Narada Muni, and direct incarnations like Lord Kapila, but not all of them are actual incarnations of Krishna. They're just known as the principal authorities on devotional service across the universe. So they may include incarnations, but not all of them are incarnations. Is that clear?
Yes, thank you, Mataji. And another questions I have is for what reason appear Krishna like in form with 4 arms, like Narayan?
So there's a few reasons. The most important one, of course, is that so many people claim to be God, and of course, these people are all ordinary jivas. When they appear as normal children. So, in order to distinguish the appearance of Krishna from the appearance of somebody who's claiming to be Krishna, the Lord appeared originally with 4 arms. There is no baby who claims to be God who's going to not. If someone claims to be God, they have to appear with 4 arms, fully conscious, fully dressed, fully ornamented. Um, his glorious effulgence was filling prison. The appearance of Krishna was quite extraordinary. So this certainly sets the Lord apart from anyone who claims to be him. So in his appearance to Vasudeva and Devaki, he did so because they knew him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So let's say they weren't surprised. They were offering their prayers to him, and this was very natural for them. But when Krishna appeared, of course, in Vrindavan, he appeared as an ordinary child. His parents there didn't see him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, of course, he wouldn't be able to appear with 4 arms. It might be very startling to them, as we remember how bewildered Mother Yashoda was when Krishna showed, when she looked into Krishna's mouth, she saw all the universes. So the way that the Lord could demonstrate to the world that he was the actual God and that this is how God should appear, if someone claims to be God, was to show his 4-armed form when he appeared to Vasudeva and Devaki. So nobody would be able to imitate him and claim to be God in the future. Is that okay?
Thank you so much, Mataji. Danava pranams.
Thank you. So Krishna had his reasons for appearing in this way, and now we will see why he actually had to appear in 2 different forms in the first place. So we find this verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita to help us in our understanding. It's Antilila, chapter 167, verse 67. Krishnonyo yad samputo yaha purnaha sosti attaha paraha vrindavanam parityajya sa kvachin naiva gacchati. The Krishna known as Yadukumar is Vasudev Krishna. He is different from the Krishna who is the son of Nanda Maharaj. Yadukumar Krishna manifests his pastimes in the cities of Mathura and Dwaraka, but Krishna, the son of Nanda Maharaj, never at any time leaves Vrindavan. So we're going to touch on the previous paragraphs when Prabhupada was mentioning the pastime of Akura taking Krishna and Balaram back to Mathura. So what happened then is that Kamsa had been frustrated in all his efforts to kill Krishna by sending demons to Vrindavan. So his plan was that Akura would bring Krishna and Balaram to Mathura, and then he would be able to kill them there. So because of course Akura was the Lord's pure devotee and a family member, Kamsa sent him to bring Krishna. And when they were going to Mathura, they had stopped at the banks of the Yamuna River. That was where Akura saw Krishna and Balaram as Lord Vishnu and Shesh. So it is described that it is at this point that Vasudev Krishna then from Krishna expanded, and he went with Akura to Mathura and then on to Dwaraka. And the original Krishna stayed behind in an unmanifest form. So now we understand why there was a need for both Krishnas to appear. Of course, only one is the original Krishna, the Lord of Vrindavan, but he never leaves Vrindavan. So even though, so he stayed behind in the manifest form, and even though he was needed to um, destroy Kamsa and all the Demoniac kings, he had his expansion, Vasudev Krishna, who went with Akura and then accomplished his mission of ridding the world of the demons. So this Vasudev Krishna is in the category of Swayam Rupa, looking identical to Krishna, but his mood is different. His mood is of a prince. Mentality is different. And therefore he is different, and he is called a Vaibhav Prakash, Swayam Rupa. So we had read of how this Vaibhav Prakash has 2 arms. So when the Swayam Rupa has 4 arms, then it is called Prabhav Prakash. So this we can understand from Krishna's pastimes that Krishna himself can have 4 arms. He doesn't only have 4 arms when he's Narayan. We know that Narayan is in the Tadikatma category, but even Krishna in his Swayam Rupa category, he can still have 4 arms. So we know there's a pastime that demonstrates this. In the Rasa Leela, when Krishna was hiding from gopis, they were so close to finding him that he didn't have a chance to hide himself anywhere. So he quickly manifested another 2 arms. So he was 4-armed Krishna, the Swayam Rupa, the original Supreme Personality Godhead, but he was displaying 4 arms now. So in this way, the gopis came upon him, but they couldn't see their Krishna with 4 arms because this is a sign of opulence. They don't love him in opulence. So they immediately assumed he was Lord Narayan, and they paid their respects to him. And then they asked him which direction Krishna had gone in. So Krishna can either appear in 2 arms or 4 arms in his Swayam Rupa. And of course, in the battlefield of Kurukshetra, he also demonstrated 4 arms to Arjuna. So he doesn't have to transform into Lord Narayan to have 4 arms. He can have 4 arms if he desires as well. That's circumstance. In his 2-armed form as the cowherd son of Nanda Maharaj, Krishna fully exhibits his opulence, beauty, wealth, attractiveness, and pastimes. Indeed, in some Vaishnava literature, it is found that sometimes in his form as Vasudev, this is now the Vasudev, the Swayam Rupa of Krishna, the expansion that has gone to Mathura to engage in the activities and pastimes he needed to there. He becomes attracted to his form of Govinda in Vrindavan. This Govinda is our original Swayam Rupa Krishna. Thus, as Vasudev, he sometimes desires to enjoy as Govinda does, although the Govinda form and the Vasudev form are ultimately one and the same. In this regard, there is a passage in Lalita Madhava in which Krishna addresses Uddhava as follows: My dear friend, the form of this cowherd boy Govinda attracts me. Indeed, I wish to be like the damsels of Raja who are also attracted by this form of Govinda. Similarly, later in the Lalita Madhava, Krishna says, Oh, how wonderful it is! Who is this person? After seeing him, I am so much attracted that I now desire to embrace him, just like Radhika. This is pretty amazing that Krishna himself is desiring so much to associate himself. Ultimately, as Srila Prabhupada says, the forms are one and the same. It's just that Krishna's mentality is different. Whether he's thinking himself a cowherd boy in Vrindavan, or whether he's thinking himself the prince, he's still Krishna. But he has these different forms because he wants to enjoy the different rasas with his devotees. So the form of Krishna in Vrindavan is so unique that even Krishna's other forms are attracted by this form. So this is really amazing. But because these forms are in different moods, they don't mix in the rasas. So, for example, Lord Balaram, another Vaibhav Prakash, like the Vasudev Krishna of Mathura, Lord Balaram is the closest to Krishna in terms of both his form and mentality. But Lord Balaram doesn't join Krishna in his pastimes with Krishna's gopis. Lord Balaram is not to be found there. Lord Balaram has his own gopis, and if, as we said, Lord Balaram is always assisting Krishna in all his pastimes. When Lord Balaram assists Krishna in his Mathura Rasa pastimes to the gopis, Lord Balaram takes a completely different form. He actually takes a form of a gopi, Ananga Manjari, in order to assist Krishna. So all Krishna's forms, because they're different moods, they are appearing in such a way for different pastimes. So they don't necessarily come together in the same pastimes or rasas. There are also forms of Krishna that are a little different from his original form, and these are called Tadikatma Rupa forms. So now Sri Prabhupada is going back to the Tadikatma Rupa forms, and we're going to understand the categories within that, that category. These may be further divided into the Vilas and the Shwamsa forms, which in turn have many different features and can be divided into Prabhava and Vaibhava forms. So these are further divided into 2-arm forms and 4-arm forms. As far as the Vilas forms are concerned, so these are the forms that are slightly different in appearance to Krishna. There are innumerable Prabhava Vilasas, so those are 4-armed appearances, headed by Krishna's expansions as Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha. Sometimes the Lord thinks of himself as a cowherd boy, and sometimes he thinks of himself as Vasudev's son, a Kshatriya prince. And this thinking of Krishna is called his pastimes. So this is what we're explaining. That it's actually Krishna's moods that are describing, that are deciding his pastimes. The forms are all the same. Actually, he is in the same form in his Vaibhava Prakash and Prabhava Vilas, but he appears differently as Krishna and Balarama. So Krishna and Balarama are always supreme above all other forms. His expansions as Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Anirudh are the original Chaturvyuha, or 4-armed forms. So we had discussed earlier on that in the Tadikatma forms, the forms that are now different from Krishna, so it's not just the mentality and the moods that are different, it's also the form that's different. That the Vilasa forms are slightly different, and Shramsa forms are a bit more different. So in this category, even amongst the Vilasa forms that are slightly different, you'll get 4-armed, 2-armed forms. So the most famous of all these 4-armed forms, most prominent forms, which all other forms come from, are the 4-fold incarnations of Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Anu. So we may have heard of these glorious names before. So earlier on, when we were reading the introduction to the teachings of Lord Chaitanya, Sri Prabhupada had explained that Lord Balaram is Krishna's first expansion, a direct expansion, so like we had described, called Amsha. And from Lord Balaram expands Lord Narayan. And then from Lord Narayan, we get this first 4-fold incarnation. So 4 expansions that come from Lord Narayan, Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Anu. And all of them are, of course, maintaining the spiritual worlds, and they further expand into a second 4-fold incarnation, and from there the Vishnus who are maintaining the material world come. So we will just look briefly at an image to give us an idea of how these forms are actually different, because besides their names being different, Vasudeva, Pradyumna, Anirudh, and Sankarshan, they also differ in the position of their the implements in their arms. So we can see that Lord Vasudeva, the first image on the left, he has the conch in his upper right arm, has the lotus opposite in his left arm, and he has the club in the lower right arm, and he has the disc in the lower left arm. So if we see next to him, Lord Pradyumna has this arrangement in a different way. And then, of course, next to him, Lord, second is Lord Sankarshan. Lord Sankarshan is second, third is Lord Pradyumna. His arrangement is different, and then Lord Anirudh at the end is also different. So they have these different arrangements that we can see in terms of their form. That's what makes them different, because otherwise you can see their beautiful bodily features are all identical. They're all beautiful bluish complexions, helmets, looks like eyes, and so on. So what is also different is their functions. We don't have specific descriptions about their spiritual functions being different, but in terms of their appearance, their functions in the material world, from the fourth canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Lord Shiva is describing their different functions in the material world. So Lord Vasudev is described as the presiding deity of the consciousness, and he is the cause of the Brahmajyoti. Brahmajyoti is coming from his bodily effulgence. Then Sankarshan is the presiding deity of the false ego in the material world, and Mahavishnu actually comes from him. And as we know, Mahavishnu is responsible for um, manifesting the universes. Srimad Bhagavatam says that they come from the cause of his body, and the Brahma says he breathes all the universes out. So in this way, he is creating the material universes, and then when he breathes them all in, or they're absorbed back into its transcendent form, then he's responsible for its disintegration. So it is described that Lord Sankarshan is responsible for these functions, and he is also the one who maintains the law of gravity. On that interesting. So then Lord Pradyumna is the presiding deity of the intelligence, and Garbhadakshay Vishnu expands from him. And as we know, Garbhadakshay Vishnu is the one who maintains and grows the universes basically by manifesting all the planetary systems. So Lord Pradyumna is in charge of this. And then Lord Anirudh is the presiding deity of the mind, and Kshirodakshay Vishnu, the super soul, expands from him, and he also expands as the sun god, Surya Narayan. Then Sri Prabhupada continues. There are innumerable four-armed manifestations in different planets and different places. For instance, they are manifested in Dwaraka and Mathura eternally. From the original four-handed forms are manifested the 24 principal four-armed forms, which are called Vaibhava Vilas. They are named differently according to the placement of the conch, club, lotus, disc in their hands. The same four principal manifestations of Krishna are found in each planet in the spiritual sky, known as Narayan Loka or Vaikuntha Loka. So what your Prabhupada is explaining is that if you take these original four forms and you move around the different um, transcendental objects in their arms, you'll get more arrangements which will create more forms of the Lord. And this leads to another principal set of forms, 24 in number. And Srila Prabhupada is going to give us their names in the next few paragraphs. So from these principal 24 expansions of Krishna come all the innumerable expansions of the spiritual sky. In Vaikuntha Loka, Krishna is manifested in the four-handed form of Narayan. From each Narayan are manifested the forms of Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Anirudh. Thus, Narayan is the center, and the four forms of Vasudev, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Anirudh surround the Narayan form. Each of these four forms again expands into three, and these all have different names, beginning with Keshava. These forms are 12 in all, and again they are known by different names according to the placement symbols in their hands. As far as the Vasudev form is concerned, the three expansions manifested from him are Keshava, Narayan, and Madhava. The three forms expanded from Sankarshan are known as Govinda, Vishnu, and Sri Madhusudan. But this Govinda has the name Govinda, but he's not the cowherd boy Krishna from our original Swayamrupa Krishna from Vrindavan. Similarly, from Pradyumna expand the three forms known as Trivikram, Vamana, and Sridhar, and the three forms expanded from Anirudh are known as Rishikesh, Padmanabha, and Damodar. So all of this is quite detailed, and it may be a lot for one to take in, but the importance is basically for us to understand the great power of the Lord. We actually have no idea of how extraordinary and vast the spiritual world is, and how these amazing forms of His are existing there, exhibiting their powers and abilities and pastimes there and all over the universes. So, what we should just take away from our discussion is a greater appreciation for Lord Krishna's power. This is very, very important, because unless we're completely convinced of Krishna's supreme power, his supremacy above all, then we could still be um, convinced by those who are against Krishna by their persuasive arguments or by our own doubts. Because when we're in the beginning stages of Krishna consciousness, our faith, our knowledge, and our devotion are not strong enough to avoid us falling victim to such things. So this is why Krishna has dedicated many verses in Bhagavad Gita, and specifically the chapters 10 and 11, to explaining his great glories, because this increases our faith in him. And it's important that when we know that God is great, that we know how great God is. This is very important for developing our faith. Another concept that we must understand is that even though Krishna is expanding into all these forms, and all these forms are so powerful as well, Krishna's power is never diminished in any way. Krishna's power is always unlimited, always ever expanding. In the Brahma Samhita, verse 46, it is said, Deepachireva hidashantaram abhyupetya Deepayate vivitahetu samana dharma Yastadrigeva hicha Vishnu daya vibhati Govindam adi purusham tamaham bhajami. The light of one candle being communicated to other candles, although it burns separately in them, is the same in its quality. I adore the primeval Lord Govinda, who exhibits himself equally in the same mobile manner in his various manifestations. So this is explaining that when one candle is lighting another candle, the original candle doesn't lose its heat and doesn't lose its power. It remains as powerful as it was before. Although the next candle that has been lit from it also has the same power of heat and light. And so any number of candles are able to be lit, and they're all equal in their power and light. So in the same way, Krishna's power is not diminished by the fact that so many powerful expansions and incarnations are constantly formed from him directly or indirectly. The Srimad Bhagavatam says that these incarnations are like the waves of the ocean. There's so many, it's impossible to count. Krishna's power is always extraordinary, and this is one of the important things that we take away from this discussion, which inspires us in our faith, inspires our faith in Him, and thus our devotion service to Him. So thank you all so much for your kind attention. I know that was a lot to take in. Are there any other questions? Anything else needs to be clarified?
Hare Krishna Mataji, thank you for the wonderful class.
Thank you.
We can request Navakishwari Mataji. Mataji, you have any questions or comments? Or Bhaktin Karura Paul Mataji, anything? Hare Krishna, welcome Damodar Prabhu. Or Risha Mataji, anything from your side? Aditi Mataji. Mataji, I just got one quick question. You mentioned those 4 forms. They look very identical to me. What are the differences between each one? The only thing I noticed was that their hands were changed with some of the items.
That's the difference.
But they all have the same. They all have the same items, Mataji.
It's the same items, but they're in a different arrangement.
Different hand. Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Mataji.
I'm going to see it again. I went through it a bit quickly, so I think maybe that's why you may not have noticed. But if you look at like the first form, Lord Vasudev, you'll see that compared to Lord Sankarshan, the second form, the upper left arm, there's a difference in Lord Vasudev has the lotus, Lord Sankarshan has this.
Okay.
And then in the lower left arm, Lord Vasudev has the disc and Lord Sankarshan has.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Mataji. But they have all the same items. Okay, thank you, Mataji.
Yes, all the same items. It's just the arrangement. So this is what Prabhupada is explaining, that in the as they expand in the spiritual world, for all their different functions. What is changing is the position of the implements in their arms. It's all the same, 4 implements, but it just is in different arrangements.
Okay, thank you, Maji. And one more question about is it Vasudev or Vasudev for Krishna?
So Krishna is Vasudev. So we know in the Sanskrit alphabet, the A can either be a short A or a long A. And the long A is carried twice as long as the short A. So you'd have A or A. So with Vasudev, which is Krishna's father, it's a short A, Vasudev. And with Krishna, it's Vasudev. The first A is carried longer than his father's name. So
thank you so much,
the
Maji.
difference is,
Thank you so much.
Krishna, there's a bit, this Vasudev Krishna, which is part of the Swayam Rupa form, that's the Lord that went to Mathura. But Vasudev in the Tadikatma Rupa is the 4-armed form that comes from Narayan. So there's a difference there as well between the two Vasudev Krishna. I hope I didn't confuse you more.
Thank you, Maji. Thank you so much, Maji.
I have a question here.
Hare Krishna.
I'd like to ask if does Lakshmi also manifest 4 arms?
Sorry?
Does Lakshmi, the cause of
Yes,
yeah,
Mother Lakshmi.
does she also manifest 4 arms?
Yes, she definitely does manifest 4 arms. That's the sign of her opulence. So usually she's demonstrated with lotuses in her upper arms, money from one of her lower arms, and giving benedictions from the other arm. But this can also change, like the way the Lord's the implements change in his arm.
Does she also have different names? Like we have, the expression of Krishna. Does she also have different names?
Yeah, I don't know them off the top of my head, but she has primarily described 8 forms, the Astalakshmis, and therefore there she's having all these different implements in her arms. But then it changes, like with Lord Vishnu, Lord Narayan, he has usually the same 4 implements, the conch, the disc, the club, and the lotus. But with Mother Lakshmi, it can be different things, not necessarily the same. And she also has different names in these different expansions, different roles. One is the mother, for example. One is primarily she's for fighting the demons or fighting and like that. So she also expresses different forms like the Lord does.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Prabhu, do we have any time for kirtan? Because I see that this was a bit of a long discussion.
Yes, Maji, just a few minutes, Kirtan will be nice. Thank you so much. Thank you for the class, Maji. Thank you everybody for joining us. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for bearing with me. I hope it was clear. So next week we're going to continue with chapter 7 of the teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Please join us. Shri Gaura Hari Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Jai. So we're going to sing a sweet bhajan. Since this, we've been discussing so many wonderful things about Krishna, which is actually very good timing because we just celebrated Krishna Janmashtami last week. So this is a traditional bhajan. Krishna Janika Namahe is very famous bhajan, glorifying Krishna's different aspects in Sri Vrindavan Dham, our original Swayam Rupa Krishna. Krishna Janika Namahe, Gokula Janika Dham, Shri Bhagavan Ko Mere Haram Bhakta Krishna Janika Namahe, Gokula Janika Namahe, Shri Bhagavan Ko Mere Haram Bhakta Bapaya He, Shri Gopala Ko Mere Barambar Naam Hai. Yashoda ji ki maiya hai, Nanda ji Bapaya hai. Shri Gopala Ko Mere Barambar Naam Hai. Radha ji ki jaya hai, Adbhut ji ki maiya hai. Shri Ghanshyam ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Radha ji ki jaya hai, Adbhut ji ki maiya hai. Shri Ghanshyam ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Luta luta dadi makhan khayo, Gwala bala sang dhinu charayo. Shri Niladam ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Luta luta dadi makhan khayo, Gwala bala sang dhinu charayo. Niladam ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Rupa Vasudeva ko laaj bachayo, Rahase gaj ko khanda churayo. Ekti padam ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Rupa Vasudeva ko laaj bachayo, Rahase gaj ko khanda churayo. Ekti padam ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Guru Pandava ko yudam chayo, Arjuna ko upadesha sunayo. Aisa Dinanath ko mere Barambar Naam hai. Guru Pandava ko yudam chayo, Arjuna ko upadesha sunayo. एक दीनानाथ को मेरे बारंबार नाम है। कृष्णा जिनका नाम है, गोकुल जिनका दाम है। श्री भगवान को मेरे बारंबार नाम है। कृष्णा जिनका नाम है, गोकुल जिनका काम है। श्री भगवान को मेरे बारंबार नाम है। बारंबार नाम है। बारंबार नाम है। See the translation? He whose name is Krishna and whose abode is Gokul, unto such a supreme personality of Godhead, I offer my most humble obeisances again and again. He whose mother is Yashoda and whose father is Nandaji, unto such a cowherd boy named Gopal, I offer my most humble obeisances again and again. He whose beloved is Radha and whose illusory energy is very amazing, unto he whose splendorous complexion is the color of the fresh rain cloud, I offer my most humble obeisances again and again. He who sneaks around to steal yogurt and butter, then hides to eat it, and who tends the cows in the company of cowherd boyfriends, unto he who is the reservoir of playful pastimes, I offer my most humble obeisances again and again. He who prevented the dishonoring of the daughter of King Drupa, and who delivered the elephant Gajendra from the grasp of the alligator. Unto he who is the abode of all compassion, I offer my most humble obeisances again and again. He who caused the great war between the Kurus and the Pandavas, and who spoke fine instructions to Arjuna on the battlefield. Unto he who is Lord of all helpless fallen souls, I offer my most humble obeisances again and again. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you for your kind attention, and please join us next week when we continue our discussion with the Lord Chaitanya. Shri Prabhupada Ki Jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.